The purpose of the Fed is to finance government spending. Full stop. Anybody who talks differently, whether they are ignorant or a charlatan, it's harmful. And what I mean with that is, I understand normal people might not, might not understand what the Fed actually is doing, and they're ignorant because they're also being fed a bunch of really wrong information. But what's really striking is when so-called professional economists, so people who are supposed to know about these things, either deny this purpose of the Fed or even worse, talk basically economically incomprehensible gibberish to divert from the actual fact that the Fed is there to finance government spending. And the reason we know that is because let's just look at the data. We have 40 trillion in debt, and that is solely only possible because we have a Federal Reserve. I want to talk about this particular issue inspired by an interview on the Big Brain podcast. Shout out to the Big Brain podcast. Douglas Dimond, a Nobel Prize winning economist. Now, look, I am pretty sure Douglas is a thorough scientist, probably a good professor, hopefully a good teacher. But when it comes to talking about the Fed, I think he misses the point like almost any other economist that I come across, even at Chicago, because the problem with the Fed is simply that they finance government spending, and they're creating a no constraint environment in Congress, which is just driving up spending, it's driving up waste, and it's going to destroy our country. If we don't recognize this, we can have a Federal Reserve as it was supposed to be, as it was designed in the 19 teens, as an insurance for banks. A, there is a point to be made if you just use very basic Austrian-inspired economics. You look at a small island, let's say, and you have a bunch of people, and they do business with each other, and they lend money to each other because some families have more excess capital and others have needs to build a new barn or something. So there is this back and forth with capital, and then there could be a situation where maybe somebody who owes money cannot repay, and then there's a run on the people who lent the money. So maybe there's a case to be made for an insurance like that. That per se is not the end of the world, but the way the Fed was designed from the get-go is to finance government spending and also enable Wall Street banks to do their thing without having skin in the game. That's fundamentally how it was designed. The American Bank or something like that. There's a book, the link's in the show note, describes the history of the foundation of the Fed. It's an excellent book. I recommend the read to anybody who has anything to do with macroeconomics, who is interested in economics, because this is an important piece of history that I think the Americans sometimes forget. And the Fed is the single most important driver of the economy for several reasons. Actually, Douglas even says in his interview, the Fed is the fast moving part of the regulatory apparatus of the government. And because it's fast moving, it does more and more and more. So there's mission creep, not necessarily because the Fed is evil, but because the government wants to have more and more say and wants to regulate more and more. And because of that, they're using the Fed. So, for example, if the government wants to, to do more climate change policy, like under Biden, they can use the Fed in many ways. For example, by buying bonds of companies that supposedly do climate protection, things like that. The Europeans are much worse at that than the Americans. There's a little bit more checks and balances here in the US, but the ECB, for example, is openly buying stocks and bonds of companies that somehow are in line with the EU policy, and it's really bad. Because where we're going with this is really to a centrally planned economy. I mean, that's where this is going. And there is very little barriers to that, because in the meantime, we're turning bigger and bigger parts of the economy into what I call trust fund adjacent sectors, like healthcare, like defense. Finance is becoming more and more a trust fund adjacent sector where you're just turning pushing paper around, collecting fees for the faucet of money which is being printed from the Fed, and that of course has no economic value. So it drives a lot of young people into professions like finance or consulting and these types of not purposeless jobs, but we should have 1/10 of those jobs, and the other 9/10 should be engineering or production driven jobs. Instead, we're flipping this upside down, and that's why we became what we are, a service driven economy depending on China, and people also getting poorer and poorer because their economic value added is just limited. If you work in finance or in insurance or as a lawyer or any of those professions, you're not able to add value relative to the cost of living, and therefore you're getting poorer and poorer. So
now, just to bring this point home, I blame the Fed for the evolution of the US economy into an economy like that, where lack of accountability, complacency, and entitlement are taking over, and the ability to actually do things, create things, is being subdued. We still have it, of course. We have it in some of our universities. We have a lot of people, mainly immigrants, who come here from Asia, particularly some from Europe, who are still trying to contribute in a positive way. So it's not all lost. But I think the purpose of this, maybe this is a bit of a rant, and I apologize for this. But the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund, and we're involved in finance as a hedge fund, so we have a skin in the game here, and we can see how the game is kind of moving away from us, and where the part of the economy where we want to play, which is the fundamentally new engineering concepts and practices with real value added, where companies add 10x in value, lower cost, democratize access to things. That part of the economy is shrinking relative to the other part because we have all this government debt and all this central planning, which is perpetrated by the Fed. And I would like economists just to acknowledge this, to stop talking about new Keynesian models and this model and that model. Those are all shenanigans. We have an institution which is front end in applying government regulations and government control over the economy. We need to put reins on this institution. We need to stop this and then put accountability back into government. Otherwise, this country will collapse. I want the economists to acknowledge this. Just start with acknowledging it, and then we can look for solutions. In medicine, you have to first diagnose the disease before you can medicate the disease. And the disease is the Fed, and the disease is this perpetual financing of government that has to stop. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. And if economists like Douglas Dimond, if they don't even say it, then who is going to say it? So that's my frustration.